Getting struck by lightning feels like hell itself. I was struck on June 27th this past year on the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. A friend and fellow group member was killed by the same bolt, and I was completely incapacitated. But I stayed conscious. The pain is indescribable, but I'll do my best. Imagine, if you will, a solid, molten, churning core of fire and heat, not unlike the core of the Earth itself, sitting at the very center of your body. From this central core there is a continuous, pulsing throbbing of pure pain. It felt like being on fire from the inside out, and there isn't anything to be done to help. The pain was so severe, the ambulance that arrived 2 hours after being struck was only able to drive a distance of roughly 75 feet on the bumpy forest road before they stopped. They stopped because of the screams emanating from the very depths of my being. It was the sound of horror, of pure pain. Upon stopping, one of the rescuers looked at me, looked across at the other one sitting in the back with me, and said, "If we don't get a chopper in here, he will die." Later, at the hospital in Flagstaff, after getting airlifted from the mountain, I recall crying, begging, and pleading with the trauma doctor to sedate me because it hurt so bad. He couldn't, though. I simply had to write it out. That was my experience. Each strike is unique. Mine was horrible. It felt like hell, but I'm still here. I was struck by lightning indirectly, and I'm very happy I was not badly hurt, or even killed. During university summer holidays in the 1970s, Christmas, and January in Australia, I worked in a team with 3 other guys spraying noxious weeds, such as briars, lantana, blackberry, etc. This was all on farm properties in the snowy mountains. The paddocks were often very steep, and several valleys away from the farm buildings and roadways. We drove our 4WD tanker truck cross-country and used small 2-stroke backpack misting units to spray the briars on the hillsides. When rain or storms threatened, we headed back to camp as downpours washed off the spray and often turned the steep hillsides to dangerous slippery mud. Driving back through the valley one time, the sky rapidly darkened, rain began and thunder and lightning cracked. It was my turn to jump out and open the paddock gates for the truck. As I touched the iron gate, lightning struck a tree on the ridge that had a large strainer post against it for the wire fence running down the hillside. The gum tree exploded, and the wire fence lit up, as did the gate that I was just touching. My muscles spasmed like galvanizing a frog's leg, throwing me and staggering me back about 5 or 6 meters. I narrowly missed slamming into the truck's bull bar. My sight vanished in a ball of light, like a camera flash to the face. I couldn't see around the white lights in my eyes for some time. Every muscle in my body ached for days, as if I had done a marathon workout, and my head throbbed for hours. I consider myself very, very lucky. A friend of a friend was struck by lightning while she was running out in a huge raging thunder and lightning storm to save her dog in the countryside. She managed to save her dog, but as she was running back to safety, she herself got hit by a bolt of lightning. She was incredibly lucky. Not only did she survive, she was very, very fortunate that she got no long-lasting internal side effects, like heart problems or vision problems. The stunning scar from the lightning strike even ended up becoming permanent, which is not common because they usually fade away. It's also called the Lichtenberg scar. However, she is one of the rare lucky ones who has this scar for life. She recalled it as being, quote, absolutely horrible at the moment, but she says she's also grateful for it in a way. She was struck by lightning while being a hero, therefore she has one hell of a story to tell, and she now has this badass and beautiful lightning strike pattern down her right arm and leg, which in my opinion has greatly added to her unique beauty. She wears it proudly, and she really loves it. She especially loves the reactions from people when they ask about those, quote, pretty scars, and she just nonchalantly tells them that she's been struck by lightning. In fact, the very first thing most people jokingly ask her is, "Did you get superpowers?" She calls it being, quote, marked by the earth, but we call it being tattooed by God or Zeus for her bravery. Incredibly lucky she was indeed. In 2005, I was sitting outside under an awning against the screen door while a friend was smoking. Lightning struck the ground down the street from us, and almost immediately, I felt like I had a hole punched through my chest. I took several steps to walk it off, and my legs gave out on me. My thoughts were scattered, and I was in a lot of pain, primarily in my chest and head. The girl I was with, who was only about 60% of my size, helped me up and walked with me into my house. I laid down on the couch, slept for a long time, and woke up feeling pretty sore. I had no burns on my body, and I was never really 100% certain what actually happened. I know it was lightning related, but I always assumed it was because of the lightning strike that was so close, and because of how I felt almost instantly afterward. There isn't really another explanation for it that I'm aware of. I just remember being startled by the lightning, and then significant pain. I live in a remote area, and thunderstorms here are rather violent. I've seen a huge jumlum tree slit in half by a lightning strike. The tree was about 60 feet tall, and the diameter of the trunk was like 5 feet. It was around the year 2012 or so. During a thunderstorm, I was in the kitchen making coffee. This was in the afternoon at about 3 p.m., and there was a huge bolt of lightning. Almost immediately I heard the thunder, which means the lightning was very close to home. At that very moment, I saw a ball of blue fire about the size of a ping pong ball taking off into the metal handle of the refrigerator and sailing around the kitchen and dining area and eventually hitting my shoulder. All of this happened in a matter of 4 or 5 seconds. Of course, I didn't feel anything. I happened to know that it was a luminous plasma created by a corona discharge in the strong electric field created by the lightning that was very close to home. It was sailing in the air, looking for a point to ground, and as I was barefoot, probably my shoulder was a good point. Such discharges carry hardly any current, but still, at the time, it was pretty scary. My house sits on a windy spot, high on a giant plateau on the prairie, where there's nothing higher for miles and miles. When the ground is dry, before the spring rains have a chance to sink in, you gotta go 20 feet down with your grounding rod to ground the hot fence. I could never figure out why all the goats kept escaping and why their fence wasn't zapping, but then it rained, and it zapped the bejesus out of me. By the time I figured that out, I had several perfectly fine fence zappers, but no goats. For the record, I know zilch about electricity. I've tried to wrap my head around it, and none of it makes sense to me. I've even played around with some magnets and copper wire, and made an LED light bulb. I almost thought I knew something once. But honestly, it might as well be magic or something. Linesmen who go out and repair the lines while it's storming. Frickin' wizards, right? Nobody in their right mind would be out there facing those dragons, but wizards. I'm certain of it. I don't know, I don't get how this stuff works. I've tried to understand. Dragons and wizards make more sense at this point. So, anyway, the house appears to be sometimes grounded, depending on how much it rains. I've done what I can about it. Our windows rattle and the ground shakes many times throughout the stormy season. Sometimes when the storms are booming their way across the sky, I feel like we're sitting in a giant plasma ball, or plagued with a flock of dragons. I'm firmly convinced that whatever it is doesn't approve of all our wires and gizmos. We just unplug everything and go hide with our dogs until the floor stops shaking and it passes over. If you've never seen it, it's a hell of a show. I've just seen it enough times. I've never personally been struck by lightning, but I've been personally affected by a nearby strike 4 times. It ranges from a room in the house completely blowing apart, to another that pops all the lights, to just enough oomph to pop all the surge protectors. And there's been several other times where we don't know if it was lightning or just static in the air, where stuff just goes bzzzt, and outlets burst into flames. I'm just done with it. Oil lamps are great. I lived in Tampa, Florida, the lightning capital of the world, for over a decade. I personally know 2 people who have been hit by lightning, one of whom was perhaps 20 feet away from me when it happened. They both survived. Being close to a lightning strike is scary. It happens really, really fast. When my friend Sean got hit, the 2 of us were racing for my apartment. I felt this weird tingle, I smelled ozone, and then there was an explosion like the end of the world. The thunder was so loud, it felt like ice picks being jammed in my ears. It picked him up and threw him on his fence. He ended up totally covered in mud, and his pocket pager, anyone remember those, was destroyed. But apart from that, he was okay. On another occasion, I was walking through a parking lot in a typical Tampa torrential downpour with my friend Timothy when my hair stood up. I just had time to think, that's weird, when lightning nailed a light pole right next to us. Same thing, this explosion of sound so loud that it feels like it's crushing your head. It's hard to overstate how loud the thunderclap is when you're standing right next to it. When I still did computer consulting for a living, I replaced lots of computers that were victims of lightning strikes. A friend of mine, who was also a consultant, got called in to replace a bunch of radio gear at a sheriff's substation that got nailed. The bolt came in through an antenna on the roof and killed pretty much every bit of electronics in the building. I wasn't a part of that job, but he said you could tell where the power lines ran through the walls just by the scorch marks. When I was about 16, I was at this bowling alley in southern Indiana playing pool when a supercell formed and started coming towards my area. A bunch of us were outside smoking and watching it roll in. It was quite an impressive sight. A wall of dark gray churning clouds that appeared to be a mile high that just kept growing and moving right towards us. After a few minutes, hail began to fall and lightning began to strike. Not wanting to get pelted by the hail, I began to turn away when a bolt of lightning struck a fireworks store across the street. It blew the cheap tin roof off the building and flipped it into a power transformer on a telephone pole, which then immediately blew up and showered the streets in sparks. A couple of minutes later, we began to hear small explosions coming from the building that was struck. Sparks caused from the initial strike began a small fire in the building, which then set off the fireworks contained within. Eventually, the fire department arrived and gained control of the situation, but it sketched me the fuck out. While in college, my dorm was on the exact opposite side of campus from the only cafeteria that was open outside of certain restricted hours, as well as from all of my classes it seemed, so I frequently had to walk across campus regardless of the weather. One day, while walking home in a light shower, having heard only a few minor rumbles of thunder, I suddenly felt a sharp electric jolt in the arm with which I was holding my umbrella, simultaneously with an intense flash. This is it, I thought. I've just walked into a charge leader, and I'm about to be struck by lightning. Of course, I quickly realized if that were the case, I'd have already been laying on my back in a smoldering heap in less time than it took to have that thought. Then the thunder struck. It just about knocked me down. What had happened, I'm fairly certain, was that a cloud-to-cloud strike had passed directly over my head, in the low clouds that so often hung over the hilly parts of campus, and the electromagnetic field surrounding the bolt had induced a high-voltage pulse into the metal rod of my umbrella, with a voltage high enough to jump the plastic handle into my hand and on into the ground. In other words, I was very lucky. Well, I was actually struck by lightning. I was a teen, around 14, just out riding my bike. I was a couple miles from home at the time. I liked to go to a park to, quote, check out the babes, as they say. Of course, they were college girls and wouldn't give me the time of day anyway, but I still appreciated the view. There were storm clouds in the sky, and it soon started to rain. I headed to a tall, thick-leaved tree for a bit of shelter from the rain. Big mistake. I should have gone to the gazebo as quickly as possible, but there were already a bunch of people huddled together for shelter from the rain. At 14, I just didn't know storm safety, and though a few people yelled at me to get away from the tree, I was a little slow in heeding that advice. I was terrified. Thunder boomed all around. The storm itself seemed to have snuck up on us. The hairs on my arms started standing on end, literally, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital. Lightning had struck the tree. According to doctors, the charge went through the trunk and into the ground. From the ground, it went into me. Apparently, I was lucky not to be standing too close to the tree, otherwise the trunk could have sparked a bolt directly into me. From that experience, I got two things: knowledge about what to do during a thunderstorm, and a pretty awesome fractal scar. My friends all thought they were cool. I enjoyed showing them off at school, too. Yeah, I got struck by lightning. Want to see the scars? It was impressive, to say the least. The girls in my school thought it was awesome. I figured, hey, maybe this will help me pick up some college girls. While they thought the boy showing off his scar was cute, they weren't willing to date this kid. The scars eventually faded, but not the mark left behind. And fortunately, I've grown older and wiser, and got rid of the jackassery and thinking I was hot stuff that impeded my social life. It turns out women want personality in a man rather than just a cool story and an awesome scar, but what 14-year-old could know?